Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Kubo. Today, I have me a very special guest, Abby Goldsmith. Abby, how are you doing today?
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, good. I was like trying to losing my voice this week, so I was trying not to cough right in the middle of the intro, but I barely made it, but I think I did okay. I really appreciate you coming on. I saw your books. I think I actually was an Audible ad, I think, on Facebook. And I was just like, I saw the cover, and people were gonna think I'm crazy, but I saw the cover. I went in. I think I read about 35% of the blurb, and I was just like, yeah, I'm buying that. And I got the other book.
Oh, that's awesome.
I got book one, and then I think yeah, it was like right away last month or whatever it was. It all blends together. Then I was like, yeah, I'm gonna save the rest of these two because I always buy at least like five a month because I gave up Coca-Cola, so I might as well spend the money somewhere, helping out authors and getting some cool books. But yeah, it was so cool. I love the ad first of all. So just so you know, it's working on Facebook,
Oh,
which is
that's really great to hear. Yeah, I
yeah,
have
yeah,
no
yeah.
idea.
Yeah, so it's really cool. But yeah, as soon as I, started diving more into it, and I don't really check reviews too much. But as soon as I read the rest of the blurb after I bought book one, I thought, okay, this is definitely my kind of thing. And I keep telling people about that recently, about the mix of and Adrian M. Gibson also mentioned that, Andy Pellequin and MJ Kuhn. We were on TBR Con together like a week or two ago. And it's just so funny because I just want to point out to the audience that that exact situation that we talked about, Andy said, have a great cover, have a good blurb, and then after that, the rest should take care of itself. And for your books, that was like me instantly. So I think it also comes down to maybe knowing flavors, a little bit. And that's why I keep kind of mentioning, but I think if you know what you like, or what you're interested in, you can kind of connect with authors, that are more in your realm of reading. So I'm really excited today to get down and talk about your series and ask you some questions and pick your brain. So
Wow,
thank
really, really glad to hear that. That's awesome.
yeah, no, I'm excited. I love dark, like dark sci-fi, or any way you want to put it, or blending the two together. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I love Warhammer. So like, yeah, I was just like, this is my kind of thing. But we'll start right there with that first question. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
It's been a little crazy and hard. I mean, I think like a lot of writers, I started very, very young, and then of course I thought it'd be real easy to become a best-selling author. Um no problem.
Amen.
Barely an inconvenience. Yeah. So yeah, I queried the big five, all the traditional publishers, and I wrote a whole bunch of novels even as a kid. I got a terrible scathing rejection letter when I was 12, and that kind of put me off for a little while.
That's fair.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, like they said some terrible things. And it was back in the 1990s where it was kind of more PC to say terrible things to young
Oh, right.
writers. Um so anyway, I still have the rejection letter. But yeah, I basically was like, oh, well, apparently I can't write, so I better become a film director instead. That should be easier. Um much easier. Um so yeah, like I went in that direction, went to film school. My student films won some awards, like got into the Annecy International Film Festival,
Oh
things like
wow.
that. Yeah. But then yeah, the year I graduated, Disney laid off their entire traditional animation department. So I was like, all
A couple of
right.
my friends actually.
Oh yeah, there
Yeah.
you go. Yeah, it was just a bad year.
Hmm.
Um, so I was like, this 22-year-old competing with all these veteran Disney animators, as a young animator. And I ended up going into video games. So then I just kind of like worked on a whole lot of like edutainment, SpongeBob, Disney games.
Oh, wow.
Um, and yeah, I did that all through my 20s, and I was like, I really want to be building my own dreams, not somebody else's dreams.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I kind of got out of it at that point, and I'd already written a bunch of novels. I went to the Odyssey writing workshop.
Oh, cool.
Um, yeah, like I got back into writing because readers seem to like, in critique groups and stuff.
Mhm.
So I was like, well, I just want to tell my own stories. Yeah. So yeah, on it went. And then it turned out like traditional publishing, the big five didn't really seem interested in like giant epic spacefaring adventure series at the
Yep.
time. So so that's when I started serializing online. And I built up an audience on Wattpad and then Royal Road, and then I got an offer from Podium.
Oh,
So
wow. Awesome.
that's where I am now. Yeah.
So many great things that you just said there. I'm trying to figure out which follow-up question. First of all, I think I have to say, I just cannot wait for you to get a huge award or, like #1 on Amazon Kindle. And then I really want you to like staple that with a copy of the letter that they sent you for your rejection letter and then send it back to them and say thank you. That's what I really we will pay for your postage on this podcast. It's not a problem. But yeah, that would just be like the ultimate pretty woman moment. I think would be really awesome. So if you ever need the postage, let me know. I'll Venmo or PayPal you. It would totally worth the money. As a teacher,
Thanks.
that stuff just drives me nuts. I had somebody on here the other day, and they said that about their English teacher, and I'm just like, why would you say that? You're supposed to be a nurturer, not like these big five companies. And that person was, I was like, I will pay to send your letter, express to your teacher because they're still teaching, and say like, hey, look at this person that won this award and did this great thing. But
Well,
yeah.
the funny thing was they didn't know I was a kid. It was like, so yeah, it was sent in. My mom sent it in,
Hmm.
like, and didn't tell them I was a child. And then what happened was when they met me, I still remember this. Like we were in New York City, and this editor, it was like a high-powered editor at Random House, and she was like, can I meet with her? And so we walked into the office, and she took one look at me, and she goes, "Oh," and she kind of was like, "Crap," and and I'm like, "What?" She's like, you shouldn't read the write-up I wrote. You just shouldn't read it." And I was like, "Why not? I can take it. I'm a mature 13-year-old. What's the problem?" And yeah, so
It's always funny to me. Somebody the other day did that just to feel like in our podcast group on Facebook just did that just to feel like a real writer. They're like they've been pretty successful for book one and two, or book one and the novella, prequel novella. And they're like, yeah, I just felt like I wasn't really part of the group, so I got a rejection letter. So then they sent a rejection letter, and then they got it, and then I don't know if what happened, but then all of a sudden, like they had all of a sudden, like the stars aligned, and then they got like a finalist award for something. I don't know. It's not one that I'm aware of. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. It's like the same day you got your rejection letter. So I keep telling people, I'll pay for your postage. It's not a problem.
that's so awesome.
I do agree with you though that it's so when you were doing that, it really sounds like the time in which, a lot of people were doing the same thing, particularly for sci-fi. I had actually started a mining series, like in outer space, kind of like Firefly, but they like mine and just get into trouble. It's just like good fun. But it was so funny hearing so many people say what you just said, like on Lindsay Broker's podcast, like a lot of them, a lot of people that went on there who did serials ended up doing really well, and then they end up doing their own anthologies, for their serials. I thought, God, that sounds really cool. You get, multiple products for, the price of one essentially. But it was so funny because Lindsay Broker made a good point. She's like, isn't it funny how, traditional publishing, like you said, was not looking for these things, but yet readers were, and I
Yeah.
listen to her podcast. Now it's done, but like I've listened to it for 10 out of the whatever it was, like 13 years or something like that. Yeah, but that just kept coming up over and over and over again. Is that, and now that indie publishing has expanded, it's like, yeah, and that's where I think I just talked about this with Andy the other a couple weeks ago on Instagram, actually messaging or something like that somewhere, and then it came into our podcast on TBRCon where it was like, we tend to think now that traditional publishing, versus indie, like they're changing a few things, but they might still not have the pulse of the readers, because I'll read anything. So
They have the pulse of a readership, but it's not the
I agree.
same as the readers, yeah, like you and I are getting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. Yeah. So I just find it funny because you're like the fifth person to mention that out of like the last six interviews that I've done. Had the same experience, but yeah, I don't know. I tend to think a lot of things are on the horizon that are changing, and I really, I see, oh my gosh, I was just looking at this author's books the other day, and now I'm gonna blank. But one of the like real most popular sci-fi authors right now, and I just think that a lot of people enjoy his books because, um, like he's hitting a readership that has
Is it
been.
Matt Dinniman? Dungeon Crawler Carl?
No, it's like is it Christopher?
Ruccio?
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. I don't know why I was blanking on that. I
He
just
has
sent
this,
him
yeah,
a friend all his books, like. because we
Yeah.
just talked about reading those for switching from fantasy to sci-fi for a book club. Yeah, so I definitely think that um, yeah, I definitely think that he's changing the market, because he has more of a pulse of, what the sci-fi readers want, and I think that's really good because like you were saying, right, you know, authors, writers, and readers are going off in this other spot, to indie to try and find, what they can't find in traditional. I think that's just a great point. I just wanted to connect those two things because I think they're slow. It's like a big ship, right? They're slowly starting to turn things around. But authors like yourself, I think it'll be interesting the next several years to see that shift because I think that you'll get other letters, in the future, kind of like Travis Baldry, with his books and everything, Legends and Lattes, because all of a sudden that was not one that I would have expected, I would have expected Tor, but just the overall market, I guess I would have expected that to be, continue to be more of an indie thing. But that gives me hope, they both give me hope that, things will swing back around for us, and traditional publishing, will be more open to, books,
Yeah.
and other people. So
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think it'll take like one big hit with TV or film or something like coming out of progression fantasy or lit RPG. That might really turn things around, but I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon.
yeah, lit RPG is just such a hard one. Like I'm reading like Homebrew right now, like book one of this series, and these guys get like sucked into their own like D&D game, and it's just so good. And I'm like, why on earth are people like not, expanding on these? I've had GD Penman on here before, Legends of Strata, like those are great books. I guess it's interesting to me because indie's shown that lit RPG is one that's really getting up there. I would say, particularly the last several years, and it's just interesting to me that traditional publishing is just like, nah, not for us. So I don't know. Yeah, it'll be interesting, I think, to kind of see things shift. But yeah, in the meantime, us indie people are just out here having some fun and getting really good books. And I always tell people, I'm like, to me, it's just like a private club. I'm like, I'll invite anybody, but whether or not they come, I'm like, we're over here just having, in my opinion, just the greatest time, And Ryan Lance and I were talking about that with Torch. He's like, I just wanted to, write something I wanted to read, and I'm like, I get that. And I used to be more traditional reader, but now, I mean, I read both, but I have the most fun, I think, when I'm reading indie because, we
Yeah.
can do things that
I
other.
noticed that's people in our age range, like people that grew up kind of in the 90s reading. So we grew up with like Tad Williams, like
Yep.
Stephen King, Anne Rice and all those. And so like for me, like Tor Books was like a great brand. And I was like, oh, like I look for the Tor books and Daw books, on the spine.
Oh, I love
And
the dog.
that's right, but that's not the case anymore, like I'm
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
now I'm
yeah,
looking for Podium and Aethon. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so I
Yeah.
do think that's happening. Yeah.
Well, that's like independent comics too, just because we're talking about it. Like, I don't read DC or or Marvel anymore. Marvel I read because they got the rights to Conan back, and they were switching several times. But then, Titan bought them out, and they've done a much better job. And was so glad that they expanded into comics, and that's exciting because at some point I'd love to get something through them. Because I would love to still do my own comic. I started off as a like illustrator and writing comics, so for me, like I just love that. But I love to see the like, Valiant has done so well. There were several others over the, Devils do publishing, things like that. But yeah, I definitely think that it's just to me, it's just cool to see an expansion of the market, particularly in comics and with books as well, because you just get so much cooler stuff. And I think the competition helps personally because like the amount of like I never would have imagined the stories that you would get today back then, if that makes sense, or
Oh
books.
yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah.
It was like somebody, I don't want to steal it, but one of the male authors I had on a while back, said it's like we're having like a fantasy and sci-fi renaissance, and I'm like, that's just a great, great way to put it, I think. So,
Oh,
I
I
hope.
agree. Yeah, yeah. It's funny, yeah, like my husband's a reader, he's not a writer. And yeah, like we are both in that same we're just like eating up everything that's coming out of
Yep.
certain sectors. We're like, ooh.
Yeah. Yep. No,
Yeah.
totally. My friends like he goes, you have too much on your Kindle, and I was like, not if it's free or 99 cents. I go, I have a budget for, particular books. And then if someone has a sale or something, I'm like, well, why not? Because I'm going to read it. Like it might take me a while, but I'm going to read it, review it on Amazon, on Goodreads. And I'll blast it out there. Like Anthony Ryan's Pillars of Swords like novella series. Oh my gosh, like I can't tell people enough about it. I mean, talk about changing the market. I mean, I just couldn't believe that like he had written something so awesome just in these short novellas. It gave me hope for novellas, and now like John Scalzi has a new one out. A lot of people are doing that. I love seeing the novella, market increase. It's super super cool. Like I said, Tatiana Basis or Samurai. I mean, people are like, "Oh, we're getting saturated." I'm like, no, I'm like, because people like me will just buy your book, not even care. I have a couple sitting in my cart right now when I get paid next for my second job, tutoring, because I'm just like, it was like several books. So I was like, oh my gosh, these just look amazing, and people keep sending me requests or arcs and stuff like that. I'm like, I need more time. I wish I had like a time machine or like a stasis pod where I could just be in there and read for 24 hours and then feel fine and go to work the next day and only an hour passes. But speaking of sci-fi, but yeah, it's just really cool. But kind of moving on here with that same topic though. So what genre or genres do you currently write in and why?
Well, I'd say like kind of progression fantasy, sci-fi. The
And
Torth series, yeah. Sorry.
no, I was just saying, sorry,
Yeah.
I was thinking in my head, I said out loud, that's just even cooler.
Yeah, well, it's like those are kind of a little niche. Unfortunately, like I think like sci-fi has kind of died a little bit in mainstream, but it's kind of thriving in indie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, but yeah, so the Torch series is definitely like space adventure in the vein of Star Wars. Um, there are space wizards and yeah, I mean, but it has a little bit of hard sci-fi going on as well. Like I don't it's not completely just off the rails. Like the powers they have are superpowers, it's bioengineered. So it's not there's a magic system, it's hard magic system. So it's not just like anything goes. Which I personally like progression fantasy because it's like you have that structure of like when you're leveling up. It doesn't have to be lit RPG, but like there's some kind of structure where you can like track how the character is doing compared to others and so forth. So it's not just like, oh, hand wavy everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it also goes to the video games we grew up with too, particularly in the 90s, because talk about progression fantasy, like Diablo came out, Diablo 2, you had Baldur's Gate, all three, then you had them come out for PlayStation. We were the PlayStation generation, I mean, and then the PlayStation 2, Prince of Persia. I just think, a lot of people, I don't know, I think a lot of fantasy and sci-fi authors think that way. And I also think a lot of our readers, particularly in indie, think that way too. So I don't know. To me, I always do that. I don't maybe not explain every little bit or something like that. But there's always some sort of, you can just tell. I'm a huge, Dungeons and Dragons fan. Yeah, so I just kind of
Yeah.
incorporate all that stuff. I think that's just cool.
It is. And like one of my big influences is Wheel of Time,
Oh
growing up in
yeah.
the 1990s, right? Yeah, and it's like Wheel of Time, it's all about like the interpersonal dynamics going on between all those crazy characters,
Yep.
and the way their situation's always evolving and then how they interact with each other. And I've always loved that, like large cast, epic, like interpersonal power dynamics that are constantly changing. And you can really get into that with epic fantasy and progression fantasy. So that's where I am.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's totally true. I always forget about the Wheel of Time. Like I'm like halfway through right now. I'm trying to wait on my friend, and I told him I was like, I don't think I can, wait for you. And he was like, "You're my Samwise Gamgee to my Frodo. Like, you have to take me with you. Like, you have to wait." I'm like, "God dang you!" I started listening to audiobooks again, and I always recommend those to people too. Oh my gosh, that's like I think that's one of my favorite sets. It's probably top three audiobooks for me, besides like Patricia Briggs and probably like Kevin Hearn's like series. Those the audio narrators for all those just did an absolutely amazing job. So yeah, that's really cool. I didn't know you had some progression in there, so now I'm like even more excited. I must have missed that. If anybody had mentioned that, I guess that's my fault for not reading
Well,
reviews. So,
no, honestly, I'm a little wary of saying that, and I actually asked them to take that off the subtitle
oh,
because yeah, because the thing is, first of all, it's not that not everybody recognizes that as a genre yet. It's not like
yep,
that well known.
your one. Yep.
Yeah, and then for two, like my main characters get beaten up a lot in the first couple books, so they are not just like leveling up right away.
Yeah.
They do later on, big time, but it I definitely had on Royal Road, which is like a progression fantasy platform more or less in lit RPG. Yeah, I had a number of readers that were just like, like why is everyone so mean to your main character? And I'm like, look, the villains are overpowered. Sorry. Like I grew up reading overpowered villains. That's how they are.
All of them, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally true. That's funny. Yeah, and yeah, I do agree with you. Progression fantasy is definitely like a newer thing. Like when like Rob J. Hayes said like he was going to switch, well, he was gonna like start to do his own progression fantasy, like Will White, but like with sci-fi with Titan Hoppers, I was like, what the heck? And I mean, I was everywhere. I was listening to everything. I'm like, I was looking at every blog article. I'm like, it was about a year and a half ago. I'm like, what is progression fantasy? I had to like literally ask him. And then I did a bunch of research and I was just like, oh, that makes total sense to me. I was like, and that sounds really cool. And that's when I went through like, I think the first 6 or 7, I blew through the first like, 6 or 7 Cradle books. Yeah, I was just like, oh, this is really neat. But yeah, that's another one too that kind of like the RPG that I hope really gets, more fuel to the fire. But people say no, but I'm like, what about grimdark? I'm like, all these romantasy, I'm like, there's been plenty of these. I'm like, you guys we've started something that cannot, Pandora's box has been open. So I'm like, whatever I am personally pioneering my own, which is going to be historical urban fantasy because I want to do urban fantasy, but because I'm a history teacher. So I have Roman military soldiers from the Lost Legion in the UK against zombies. And that's how I'm going to explain where they went. And then I'm going to take that crew and I have a few of them that are going to then like travel around basically like Western, Eastern Europe and then back down to Rome and do this really cool thing. But they're gonna be like a monster hunting crew. They just keep getting in the way of like different monsters. And people are like, oh my God, you created a genre. I'm like, yes, I did. So I was like, why can't progress? So I go back. I'm like, why? That sounds interesting to people, right? So I'm like, why can't progression fantasy and lit RPGs be the same thing? I saw people the other day kind of crapping on lit RPG. I'm like, why? And I think people used to do that with dark fantasy too. That back in the day, they're like, no, it's sword and sorcery. And then they're like, no, it's classic fantasy or whatever. You know what I mean? I'm just like, well, you still have cool stuff. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, let's not get like, no offense, like tradition. I'm not talking about authors, but traditionally publishing, with some of the people in charge. And, I'm like, I think at one point I would love to see just no genres, in fantasy and sci-fi and just kind of see them intermix. And at this point, they kind of are getting that way. You know what I mean? Like, to
Yeah.
an extent.
Oh, I
So
agree. Like I had so much trouble classifying Torth. It's like, um, what genre is it? My gosh, it's like everything genre.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's got a lot in it. It's a million word series. So a lot's happening.
No, it's fair. One of the authors I talked to, it was like Michael R. Fletcher or something a long time ago. He was like, I just want to call it like cool, whatever, and just leave it at that. Cool bleep even, and just leave the, asterisk there. I'm like, that's fair, but I always point to, oh, the like the golden compass, and I over the years, I'm 36, over the decades, like I've seen that in young adult, middle grade fantasy, sci-fi, and sometimes, they just put it up front just to make it easier, and
Right. Oh,
like fun.
totally.
Everybody
Yeah.
loves that, So yeah.
Yeah, that Outlander, I was a fan of Outlander, and again, it's like,
Yep, that's a
is
good
it
one.
romance? Is it history? Is it adventure? Nobody knows.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
sci-fi, yeah, like yeah, it'd be kind of
yeah,
yeah, kind of interesting. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think again, that's where, as long as you feel comfortable in the genre and people are able to find you, right? You're able to build your audience. At the end of the day, it's like just read or listen to the book. That's what I always tell people.
yeah.
Okay. This is my favorite question because I love just picking authors' brains and creators and artists. But what is your Torth series about, and how did you come up with this idea?
Uh,
I
yeah,
know, I know. We'll ride the wave together. I promise.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I will say, like, yeah, my little short blurb in a galaxy spanning utopia where the rulers are networked together for instant communication, kind of like the Borg, but with personalities. Nothing goes unnoticed. There's no crime, no secrets, no privacy, no way to escape. So everything's shared, and that's kind of like very dystopian. It's a utopian dystopia. Um, until Thomas unintentionally captivates a top influencer. If he's going to help his enslaved friends, he needs to trick her, plus her audience of 30 trillion followers. And so Thomas's galactic conquest begins. So yeah, that's my pitch. It's it's multi point of view. It's large cast, so it's not just about Thomas, but obviously when you're trying to pitch something, you've got to condense it.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. Thomas's power is an interesting one. He can soak up information by sitting close to somebody
that's cool.
telepathically. Yes. So he is a what's known as a mutant super genius, and there are 17 of them in the Empire. And so he's got enemies that are have the same power. And they are kind of later in the series it ends up being a little spy versus spy. I mean, it's very much like these mutant super geniuses have trillions of, minions, warships, robots, drones. They have anything they want and they can do whatever they want. So yeah, the gloves come off.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very like classic villain, especially sci-fi, like 90s, Star Wars, Rebels versus the Empire, like
Yeah,
just
Clone Wars, right, exactly.
like
Like
literally take your pick. That's
yes,
awesome.
and there are bioengineered superpowers, which they also start using those at their beck and call. People that can teleport, people that can, Stormbringers that can shoot lightning. Um, yeah, so another one of the main characters is Ariok. He's a giant who is a former gladiator that escaped, and he's a Stormbringer. So he's basically like Ariok. Sorry, Thomas has like two kind of main characters that he's working with, and Ariok is one of them. The other one is a former slave who escaped, and she's an elderly slave who kind of she's been downtrodden, but she is quite wise. She knows she's been around the block. So yeah, with those two, he really starts to build like his own empire, kind of
Oh, that's cool.
versus the yeah, and it starts to get renegades from the Torth Empire. So there's a lot of it's a big war. It's a galactic war.
Mm.
Yeah,
Well, if I wasn't already sold, I'd be sold now. So you said
that's
some
good.
keywords there. I'm like, all right, yeah, yeah, yeah. I had somebody a while back where an author, I asked them the question and with their blurb in particular, where they read it, and it was so funny. They got back to me. They're like, I had like the same kind of thing, different story, but they had actually like wrote down, like got the transcript, and then wrote down or highlighted words that were like key words that had influenced them, and then they actually backtracked that with their story, and that's how they came up with their blurb. So it was really cool. So, but I feel like people could totally do that with what you just said, and kind of go from there. I'm just like, yep, yep, yep. All right, yep. I always tell people if that's not, you know, like up your alley in some way, then you're probably on the wrong podcast. Fiction's over there. But yeah, that sounds awesome. Um, so yeah, I have quite a few questions once we get going here. For like the next one. So for the next one, so your Torch series is labeled as a dark sci-fi epic fantasy, and I am so curious because I want to do the same type of thing, with kind of like a Warhammer thing, um, where you're mixing dark sci-fi with epic fantasy. So I'm curious at how you were able to combine dark sci with epic fantasy with your story. Like, where did you start? I guess is my thing.
Um, well, part of the whole like I do a little bit of social satire. I like to do that in my work. And part of it, this is kind of satirizing Twitter, like Twitter mobs,
Oh, that's cool.
which is dark. Nobody likes Twitter mobs. Nobody
Yeah.
likes Reddit mobs or any of that. So there's the dark. Um, yeah. The bad guys are basically like influencers, social influencers, and they're very, very, very powerful with trillions of followers. So, um, yeah. So there's a lot of that. With the sci-fi, I mean, I loved Star Wars. I loved Otherland growing up. Yeah. I mean, like, I feel like there's a lot you can do with. I'm obviously sci-fi fantasy. For me, like those genres can be similar. Um, I don't know, epic fantasy influenced by Wheel of Time. Again, the interpersonal power dynamics, like the magic system. I'm calling it a magic system. It's really more like a superpower system, but it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yep, yep. I totally get that. I have some surprises for people when I do my type thing like that, and I'm like trying not to tell people too many things because I feel like it's gonna like give it away. I have like, but that's like basically what I'm doing is I'm like, oh yeah, it's magic, but really it's like yeah, it's like superpowers essentially, or they could be considered yeah like mutants or something like that, and when it is a distant future, but Yeah, I think it's hard, right? Because I always think about Warhammer the same way. I'm like, is it really magic, or I don't know. I just kind of go back and forth on that one because they do have a lot of technology. Yeah, so I'm
Yeah.
always kind of
Well, I
excited.
like to explore like the democratization of power, like in a lot of like
That's a
epic
good.
fantasy, it's a hereditary. You just happen to win the genetic lottery.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So in mine, I like to have it like, well, you kind of won the genetic lottery, but it's because you were born in a baby farm, bred to be that way by like, very intentional people.
Yeah.
So you were born that way for a reason by people that want to use you. Um, so super soldiers.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Or like 11, right? Like, yeah, Stranger
yeah,
Things. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's really neat. So I guess I was curious, like in terms of the world building, like, so if I'm one of these like other 17 like people with these powers, right, and have all these, trillions of followers. So if I want to attack you, can I just tweet at them and then they just like try to either kidnap you or kill you, or can I just put a bounty out? It's just
Oh
like
yeah.
the
If
button.
As long as they respect you, if you don't lose your followers, you always have to have their respect.
Yeah,
Yeah, but so don't fail too much. Don't do any failure things. Just succeed a lot and make sure they respect you. And then yeah, you can ask them to do anything and they will do it.
oh, that's interesting. That does like really come right from Twitter followers. I feel like people do that, right? They're like, oh, we totally hate this person now, and they're like, everybody's like, okay, like we're on board, or whatever.
Right.
We've been talking about that, and we will talk about it more. I have a new class starting for participation in government, and we were talking about that the other day. Somebody brought it up. They're like, yeah, like some people like to influence their voters now, with social media. And they're like, I'm like, so what's the problem with that? They're like, well, they could pretty much put anything and people will believe it and then they'll act on that. And we kind of talked about that route, right? Of what, kind of sounds like started writing. So to me, that just sounds like really, really interesting. And that's what sci-fi should be, right? Like taking something that's today a problem and, showing different other problems that can result from it and then solutions. So that's really my favorite type of sci-fi is, when you take like a real world issue and, that affects everybody and then, put it in the sci-fi world and then put it into a great story and then you learn a result from it. So I think that's really, really cool.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I describe this as like taking social media to its natural conclusion.
That's
So
true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's totally true.
yeah.
I was just watching, like rewatching a TikTok on a sci-fi movie from years ago, and I'm like totally blanking on what I was. Can you tell I've been writing a lot or what? The craziest like 2024. I'm almost done editing. Yeah, but they were like, it was like the internet, and it wasn't the Matrix, but it was something else where like they basically like gave up all themselves. Oh, you know what it was? It was Bruce Willis in Surrogate, and there was another movie at that time too that was kind of similar with Gerard Butler, where he was like it was like a lit RPG sci-fi movie, and it's like Gamer, I think, or something like that, and it was actually really good, but it like both of them really went into how far are we going to go with the internet and are we going to get to a point where like surrogates where like you just are in your house and there's like another body and your consciousness actually goes out and then that's the body that like everybody sees and works and things like that and they're like kind of like Iron Man, right? Like they're pretty much indestructible and stuff. And there's like a detective that discovers all these things. It was like a really great sci-fi movie that nobody kind of went for. But yeah, it kind of goes with like we were just saying, like that same kind of line, where it's like I always think of like Ready Player One, right? Like, could that be our future? Like, you just never know. So, yeah, but that's really cool. I like how you like really went further with, just the like the Twitter thing, just in general, and kind of went to its darker side to teach us to maybe not tweet as much, but or be
Yeah.
careful because it is a weapon, right? Like people are literally using it like modern, like a modern day sword, right, to destroy your enemies. So it's kind of interesting that to think about the ramifications of that into the future. So that's like really interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Be like up all night now thinking about it, like and like possibilities and things. Um, oh, I got kicked out. Oh, I had one more. Okay. So I was curious when you say like empire, like is it just the like those kind of like 17 or people with powers that have their own empires, or is there like one overall empire that like they're working within?
Yeah, there is. It's the Torth Empire. So
Okay.
it's a galactic empire and they've conquered every other alien civilization. They do it by they have instant communication. They basically have superluminal instant communication across the galaxy. They can coordinate like nobody else. So they've been able to conquer all aliens, enslave them, and steal their technology. So very much like the Borg. Um, yeah,
That is just like scary to think about. Like, yeah, that's I don't know. This was like an interesting concept to like really think about, like if that would be possible.
yeah. I had fun with it, and yeah, I mean, I think they are genuinely scary.
Yeah. The Borg always like terrified me personally. Um, I can't even remember when I like first like encountered them. I think my grandpa, it had been a long time ago. But yeah, it was just like I used to watch a lot of sci-fi with him and stuff, and he was into Buck Rogers, Star Trek, Star Wars. Like he was just fascinated with sci-fi. It's probably why I enjoyed it so much. But yeah, when the board came up, I was like, I remember I was like terrified, like because
Yeah,
that was like I don't know, it was just like an interesting concept to me now, but back in the time, back when I was like a kid, I was just like that would
yeah.
be terrifying. And now to think that that could be our future, as
Oh,
an
I know.
adult, I'm just like that's like really scary. And I think like Terminator too, right? Like what people are doing with these androids and stuff, like teach them how to run and stuff. I'm like, didn't we have like 8 movies about this? It just gets really interesting. But I think those are the two that always creeped me out in terms of sci-fi. Not aliens so much. I'm like, because eventually they were able to defeat them or whatever.
But
But
that's the thing. It's like people are scared of zombies because it's basically like humans acting weird. Like humans acting in weird insectile animalistic ways in a mass. Um and that's terrifying, and it's like
true, yeah.
yeah, like the Torth, they're intelligent. They're intelligent zombies basically. I mean, it's like um and they have like these leaders of the Torth, these are the supervillains. They have personalities. I mean, like and they you can recognize a little bit of human issues in them. It's like the commander of all living things was elected to her position. Um she's kind of like the Borg queen, if you will. And I mean, but the thing is, like, she, takes it's difficult to get to that position. You have to be a crazy risk taker. You've got to please the crowd constantly. And if you fail even a little bit, if the crowd starts to not like you so much, they will vote to kill you and replace you.
Well,
So, yeah, so she's like constantly like walking that edge, like what can I do to please the crowd? And if I fail, like I've got to be real careful. Um, so there's a little bit of humanity there, yeah, I think people can relate to, where it's like
yeah,
when you're performing online, it's like, oh, how, better not say anything to piss off the crowd.
yeah.
Um, yeah. And then I've got like one of the super geniuses known as the upward governess. I mean, she has a disease where she's dying. The crowd has voted basically to not allow her to cure herself or to have a cure. So, right, so she just wants to live. She just wants to live to adulthood. That's all she really wants. I mean, it's not that big an ask in our world, but yeah, like so she'll do anything to get to get what she wants, right? So, yeah, so she'll manipulate the crowd any way she can to get herself greater rewards, to get herself just a little more leeway so she might be able to get this medicine. Um,
That's very relatable. Yeah.
yeah.
You got to wonder, like, with people who, really depend on their following, right? Like, for different, just like psychological things, right? Like, you definitely see a lot of fall from graces. I always curious if that's because, they're trying to, um, do something personal while following the crowd. And then if it just doesn't work, then they're just done. So, because you always wonder, like, why would you do something so stupid, But I don't know. You got to wonder, like, different pressure situations, right? Like, I don't know. I just always find it really
Yeah.
interesting. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm really thinking about it now. Maybe I'll be less judgy in the future. I don't know. So what did you focus on first in the Torch series? The characters, world building, or your evil empire?
Probably the evil empire. I'm a sucker for the evil empire. Yeah. I mean, I think like a lot of it is just kind of from my childhood, like inspired by going against the grain, not really fitting in very well. I think any kid that's a big reader probably has felt some of that, like
Yeah,
you're the weird kid that just constantly reads. Um, so a lot of kids like that will get bullied or like kind of are in the out group. Um, yeah, and so like you can kind of see um the just the social dynamics of how that works.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So kind of inspired by that. Yeah.
I had a girl, student now she's, oh my God, this was like a while ago now. Now she's in college. For me, that I always keep them right where, which grade they were with me. Then I see them somewhere, I'm like, wow, you're like taller than me now. But she had just made such a great comment because we were just chit chatting, like a lunch, like study hall or whatever with a bunch of kids. And I had one group where we were talking fantasy and sci-fi. We were kind of talking about like big empires and stuff. And I teach history, and we were just talking about like basically like we were talking about the Underground Railroad and how people started to rebel against Fugitive Slave Act and all these things, and how it really ramped up the North basically for preparing for the Civil War. And it was just so interesting because then one of them mentioned like Star Wars, and everybody in that class like loved Rogue One. And I just said something, and I was like, she goes, yeah, maybe people don't like you, meaning me and you and like our generation, because we were taught to rebel. Like we weren't taught to be part of the empire. You know what I mean? But like from I can't think of any book I read, fantasy, sci-fi, or comic, superhero thing, like Spider-Man's a rebel, and it's like she goes, you were taught to rebel. She goes, so our generation, your kids or younger, also taught to rebel because we learned it from you. And I was just like, it blew my mind, and I was just like, damn, like that's a good point, and I was talking to one of my class about that. I was like, you guys don't take crap from nobody. I was like, somebody tries to give you a status quo and you don't like it, you're like, and I'm like, where's that come from? And then I think back to that conversation. I was like, oh, okay. So I think that's, particularly what's fun about fantasy and sci-fi. So I totally agree with you. I think that it was okay to be an outlier, I was like a football player, I was an athlete, but I didn't want to hang out with those people. I didn't like them. I wanted to hang out with my actual friends, who were cool. We would play video games, 4-player Champions of Norath forever, and we loved Star Wars, superhero movies. Like we had fun, and some people are like, why are you hanging out with those guys? I'm like, because they're my friends and we have fun. I just didn't care. And I never thought about that till right now, but that's probably because of the influences from different authors, and those ideas, that it's okay to be a rebel, it's okay to, do your thing. So, kind of just blew my mind there, Abby. So
Oh,
now I have to
yeah.
reanalyze my entire life, but that's okay. That's really what learning's all about. And I think reading's a good influx for that. But yeah, I totally agree with you. So you kind of went there. So you went from the top kind of, and then did you go with the world building and then kind of focus on your characters and how they would fit into this, type of system?
It's more character first. Yeah.
Got
I mean, yeah, like I would it's really about the like Thomas is the hero that everyone needs, and so is Ariok, honestly. I mean, like it's really like it's hard. Yeah, like I guess I'm just saying like Thomas he is okay with being different. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about fitting in. The Torth try to peer pressure him into becoming one of them,
it.
and he just is like, no. Um, and then his friends try to peer pressure him into becoming one of them and, being the rebel that they want, kind of a genocidal maniac. And he's like, no. So he basically does things his own way, like on his own terms. And that's unusual in both sides of this war.
I I that makes total sense. I was just discussing that in terms of political parties for the United States, and some of my kids, it's so funny because they're like, we don't like either one. Like, why not? They're like, they're too worried about doing things their way or fighting each other, and I'm like, hard
Yeah.
to disagree. I'm like, hard to disagree, and
The purity tests and the purity
yeah,
spirals on both sides, right? Like you have to agree with all of the bullet points
all of them. Yep.
uniformly, or you're not one of us.
Yep, yep.
Um,
Oh, totally.
yeah, yeah, and Thomas encounters that even on his own side. Like he starts a whole rebel empire, founds it, and then they set up rules, and it turns out he doesn't like the rules that they set up. So, yeah, so there's a whole lot of that going on. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's kind of too how like a couple characters were in like the Divergent series too, where they're all the rebels, but then some of them tend to, filter off, and yeah, there's holes there too. I always try to tell kids, they're asking me about, like that's historical sociology right there. They're like, how come this, how come that? And I'm like, there weren't any Nazis here before, World War II, and now we have plenty of them, and it's like, they always ask me, how is that? And I try to explain that, right? It's like once the sides are formed, whatever, I'm like, then you have factions, or now everybody believes the same thing. I'm like, so yeah, I love history for that because it makes really cool stories, like what you were just saying, right? And it just makes things way more interesting when you put somebody in one of those real life perspectives. So I have that too with teaching though. People like this or that. And I'm like, I'm just here for the kids, man. I'm like, I don't want to do this and fight with this person. That was like my old school, a couple of school districts. Like, seems like a lot of people are more worried about them, which I get. It's your job and stuff. I'm like, I'm more worried about, like how much time we're wasting, where, and resource we can help kids instead. So that's when people at my first job here in New York State, they looked at me like, oh, he's the enemy. He's going to go tattle on us or this or that. I'm like, no, I just don't want to waste time. So I could totally relate to him as a character, particularly once he rebels. So that, yeah, I like that. That's like a really good characterization, I think, that you chose there, and that's really neat. And I think that's something that people like myself, could really relate to. So that's awesome. So, which location that you have created would you like to visit the most, and why?
Hmm. Freedom Land. It's the best city in the universe. I mean, yeah, like that's this is spoilery because it is later in my series. Sorry, it's not not in books one or two. Um, but yeah, the honestly, yeah, like books one, two, three, like it's dark, it's dystopian, it's not a great universe, it's ruled by the Torth. Um, but later on, my main characters found a city apart from the Torth Empire, and it starts to become their hub of civilization. And it's great. It's a melting pot of all kinds of aliens. There's all kinds of stuff going on there constantly. Um, it's magic is legal there, basically. Everything is legal. So Freedom Land is a fun place. I think I'd want to visit it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Which character would you like to meet most from your series, and what is one question you would like to ask them?
Ooh.
I
I think
know.
yeah. I would avoid meeting Thomas because he's a super genius and he might be angry at me for some of the things I put him through.
He just turned like you.
Yeah, he would have some terrible death for me, most likely. So, or some kind of horrible fate worse than death just for me.
Yeah, yeah.
So, nah, I'll skip meeting him. I'll meet Aryok. You know, he's a violent Titan, but he's also Heart of Gold teddy bear.
Hmm.
So, I mean, yeah, like he's the kind of friend everybody wants. I
Yeah.
want him on my side. Yeah.
It's like your version of Chewbacca, right? Just like big brute but loyal. That's like a sucker trope for me. I'm like, if you have one of those, I saw the cover, I was like, yeah, I'm in. That's like I knew that was a gonna be one of those sci-fi, or just one of those characters that I was gonna be really into. So there are a couple more I saw recently. I'm like, oh, yep, that's gonna be like that's my kind of guy. So my kind of character. So that's really funny.
Exactly. He's a really nice guy. So, I mean, can't go wrong with that.
What would you ask him then? What would be a
Oh,
question that you ask him?
to ask him. Um, I mean, does he know that I'm the author or not?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He might be a little pissed off if he knows. But I mean,
I think all of our characters at this point would be like, why did you take my family from me? Why did you start me on this journey? Like, why did you take one of my hands or fingers? Or
right,
why do
exactly.
we keep, why can't we ever get chocolate or sleep in a nice place? Something like that. Like, yeah, it's probably a good thing that we can't meet our characters, quite frankly, like Inkheart, because well, that movie did a good job, right? Because it showed like the character was pretty PO'd at the author Brendan Fraser. So I feel like that'd be the case for most, particularly in fantasy and sci-fi. But
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
So we're gonna be finishing up here. So I want to make sure you have enough time to let us know if you have any news, updates, current projects, anything like that that you can share with us.
Yeah, Torth series is coming out every 4 months. So book three is coming out in May. That will be World of Wreckage. And the rest of the series is coming out over the next year. So that's going on. Meanwhile, I am working on a new series.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, and I also have a standalone novel, which I'm considering querying Big Five, and that's kind of about kind of a satire of ChatGPT.
Oh, cool.
Um, yeah. So, but the new epic fantasy series is a little bit of a satire of uh corporate and shitification, if I can say that word.
Oh, cool. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's magic. It's epic fantasy. And yeah, the main character basically reinvents or invents magic based on ancient legends and gets catapulted way above his rank into like the realm of imperial machinations and kings. And so is he gonna kind of ally with one of these kings and become just another evil archmage? Or is he going to go in a direction nobody expects, with including his best friend? So yeah, that's it's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm having fun with it already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you sold one, so good job. That sounds
Thanks.
awesome. That's really cool. Well, Abby, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate, you taking your time and, telling us about the Torth series, and, just let me kind of dissect a couple things with you. I learned a lot, I have a lot to go back over and reflect on, which is always fun for me before I always use before I do my writing sessions. So I always get the flow after that. It kind of feels like I'm using the force or something, or have my own mutant genetic powers. But yeah, it's always really helpful for me. So I hope that, other people, find our chat just as helpful. I just want to remind everybody in the audience, please make sure you're going down anywhere where you are watching or listening to this audio interview, and make sure that you check out Abby's links, social links, websites, books, things like that will all be right there. Please let us know if you have any questions, and we can shoot them right to Abby through email. Abby, I'll have like your website, anything else you want to send me, just feel free to send it to me, and it'll all be right there. That way people can contact you. But other than that, Abby, I look forward to, having you on in the future and, talking some more about, this tour series and, some of your other projects. They all sound really fascinating. So, I really look forward to, asking you some more questions and, learning from your writing tips and experiences. So,
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
yeah, well, I hope you have a great rest of the day, and hopefully I will talk to you soon on social media. Other than that, just I'll be emailing you soon. But other than that, I hope you have a good rest of the day.
All right, you too.
Thanks. See you later.
Bye.